You know what they say about the best laid plans? They're usually laid by someone else, and you're just the poor bastard who gets to watch them explode in your face. That's exactly what happened on my 38th birthday, though I should have seen it coming from the moment my wife Elise announced she was helping with the party planning. Alex, honey, she'd said 3 weeks earlier, perched on our kitchen island like some kind of suburban goddess in her perfectly pressed yoga pants, I've invited a few extra people to make sure your birthday is really special. I should have asked who. Hell, I should have run screaming from the house right then and there. But no, I was still operating under the delusion that my wife of 8 years actually gave a damn about making me happy, rather than orchestrating the most spectacular public humiliation this side of a reality TV show. The morning of the party, I stood in our designer kitchen, all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that cost more than most people's cars, watching Elise flutter around like a beautiful, manipulative butterfly. She was in her element, organizing, controlling, making sure every detail was perfect. Not for me, of course. Never for me. But for the show she was about to put on. "Did you remember to pick up the ice?" she asked without looking up from her phone, where she was probably texting God knows who about God knows what. "Got it yesterday," I replied, pouring myself what I knew would be the first of many cups of coffee I'd need to survive this day. Along with the beer, the wine, and those fancy little appetizers you insisted we needed. "They're not fancy, Alex. They're appropriate for the kind of people we're entertaining." There it was. The kind of people we're entertaining. Not my friends. Not people I actually wanted to spend time with. The kind of people Elise deemed worthy of gracing our suburban palace with their presence. My son Max wandered into the kitchen, still in his pajamas despite it being nearly noon. At 12 years old, the kid had already developed the kind of sharp wit that would either make him a successful comedian or get him punched in the face a lot. I was betting on both. "So, Dad," he said, grabbing a piece of toast, "ready for another year of pretending to like Mom's friends?" "Max," Elise snapped, finally looking up from her phone. "That's not appropriate." "Neither is inviting people Dad can't stand to his own birthday party, but here we are," Max shot back with the kind of brutal honesty only kids can get away with. I had to hide my smile behind my coffee mug. The kid wasn't wrong. "Your father enjoys meeting new people and expanding his social circle," Elise said, using that tone she reserved for when she was trying to convince everyone, including herself, that her version of reality was the correct one. "Is that why you invited Eric?" Max asked innocently. The kitchen went dead silent. Even the coffee maker seemed to stop gurgling. Eric Morgan. The name that had been hanging over our marriage like a storm cloud for the past 6 months. Elise's ex-boyfriend from college, who'd recently moved back to town and opened some trendy gym that catered to housewives with too much time and money. The man-shaped protein shake who drove an obnoxious red Camaro and apparently thought wearing tank tops in October was a reasonable fashion choice. "Eric is an old friend," Elise said carefully, "and it would be rude not to include him when I'm inviting other people from the neighborhood." "Right," I said, setting down my coffee mug with perhaps a bit more force than necessary. Because nothing says, "Happy birthday, honey," like inviting your ex-boyfriend to eat cake in our living room. Elise's eyes flashed with that particular brand of anger she'd perfected over the years, the kind that said I was being unreasonable for having feelings about things that directly affected me. "Alex, we've talked about this. Eric and I are friends, that's all. You're being paranoid." Paranoid. That was her favorite word lately. Anytime I expressed discomfort with her increasingly frequent mentions of Eric, or questioned why she needed to go to his gym when we had a perfectly good fitness center at the country club, I was being paranoid. "Friends don't usually spend 2 hours texting each other every day," I pointed out. "We're planning a charity event for the community center," she said, which was news to me. "It requires coordination." Max looked back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match, then shook his head and headed for the stairs. "I'm going to go play video games until the awkward family drama is over." Smart kid. After he left, Elise moved closer to me, putting on that smile she used when she wanted something, the one that used to work back when I was stupid enough to believe it was genuine. "Baby, I know you're stressed about turning 38. I'm not stressed about my age, Elise. I'm stressed about my wife's ex-boyfriend becoming a regular fixture in our lives." "He's not a fixture. He's a friend who happens to live in our community now. And tonight, he's a guest at your party. Our party. Can you please just try to be civil?" Civil. She wanted me to be civil to the guy who'd been sliding into her DMs like some kind of muscled-up snake, while she pretended it was all perfectly innocent. "I'm always civil," I said, "but don't expect me to pretend I'm happy about this." She sighed dramatically, like I was the unreasonable one in this scenario. "Fine, just don't embarrass me tonight, okay?" Don't embarrass her. Not let's have a good time or I hope you enjoy your birthday. Don't embarrass her. I should have known right then that the evening was going to be a disaster. But like an idiot, I held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, my wife would remember whose birthday it was and act accordingly. The guests started arriving at 7. First came Jake, my best friend since college and the only person I'd actually wanted to invite. He took one look at the spread Elise had laid out, complete with color-coordinated napkins and enough food to feed a small army, and whistled low. Jesus, Alex, what did you do? Rob a bank? Elise wanted to make sure everything was appropriate, I said, making air quotes. Jake grabbed a beer from the kitchen and surveyed the scene as more people filtered in. Let me guess, her crowd? Oh, you have no idea. And I wasn't kidding. Over the next 30 minutes, our house filled up with the usual suspects from Elise's social circle. There was Tessa, the neighborhood gossip queen who somehow managed to know everyone's business before they did. Charlotte, who smiled to your face while mentally cataloging your flaws for later discussion. A handful of other wives from the country club, all perfectly manicured and artificially friendly. Then there were the husbands, dragged along like reluctant accessories, nursing their drinks and checking their phones every 5 minutes. I recognized a few of them from various community events, but couldn't say I actually knew any of them well enough to have a real conversation. My coworkers from the cybersecurity firm showed up around 7:30, looking as out of place as I felt at my own party. They clustered near the kitchen, talking shop and eyeing the fancy appetizers like they might bite back. Nice spread, said Tom, one of the senior analysts. Very upscale. Elise is doing, I explained. She has particular ideas about entertaining. Tom nodded knowingly. He'd met Elise at a few company events and had clearly formed his own opinions about her priorities. By 8 o'clock, the house was packed, the noise level was approaching small aircraft territory, and I was already counting the minutes until I could reasonably claim exhaustion and escape to my office. That's when the front door opened one more time, and Eric Morgan walked into my house like he owned the place. I'll give him this. The man knew how to make an entrance. 6'2", broad shoulders, perfectly styled hair, and wearing a shirt that probably cost more than most people's grocery budget. He had a gift bag in one hand and a bottle of expensive whiskey in the other, because of course he did. Alex, he called out, like we were old friends who hadn't seen each other in years. Happy birthday, man. The conversations around us paused for just a moment, that subtle shift that happens when someone particularly noteworthy enters a room. I could practically feel the wives straightening up, the husbands sizing up the competition. Eric, I said, accepting the handshake he offered. His grip was firm, probably a little firmer than necessary. Thanks for coming. Wouldn't miss it, he said, then looked around appreciatively. Beautiful house. Elise has excellent taste. Of course he complimented Elise. Of course he did. She certainly has opinions about decorating, I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. That's when Elise appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. It was black, fitted, and definitely not something she'd wear to a casual neighborhood barbecue. This was a dress with intentions. Eric, she practically squealed, moving in for a hug that lasted just a beat too long. I'm so glad you could make it. I brought that whiskey you mentioned, he said, handing her the bottle. The 18-year Macallan. She mentioned it. When? During one of their marathon texting sessions, their charity planning meetings that apparently required discussing my liquor preferences. You're so thoughtful, she gushed, then turned to me. Alex, isn't this sweet? Eric remembered you mentioning how much you liked good whiskey. Except I'd never mentioned anything to Eric about whiskey. I'd never had a conversation with Eric about anything more substantial than the weather, which meant Elise had been discussing my personal preferences with her ex-boyfriend. Very thoughtful, I managed, accepting the bottle. Thank you. My pleasure, Eric said, and I could swear there was something in his smile that suggested he was enjoying this whole situation a little too much. Jake appeared at my elbow, having witnessed the entire exchange. Nice bottle, he said diplomatically. Eric owns that new gym downtown, Elise explained, like this was relevant information Jake desperately needed. He's doing amazing things for the community. Is that right? Jake said, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice even if Elise couldn't. We're actually working together on a charity fitness event, Eric said, moving closer to Elise. Your wife has some brilliant ideas about community outreach. There it was again. Your wife. Like she was some kind of shared resource we were both invested in. She's full of ideas, I said, and left it at that. The conversation mercifully moved on as other guests demanded attention, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just Eric's presence, though that was bad enough. It was the way Elise lit up around him, the way she seemed more animated and engaged than she'd been in months. It was the little looks they exchanged, the inside jokes I wasn't part of, the casual way he touched her arm when he was making a point. I spent the next hour playing the role of gracious host, making small talk with people I barely knew, accepting birthday wishes from acquaintances who wouldn't remember my name next week. All the while, I kept one eye on Elise and Eric, watching their little performance. Because that's what it was, a performance. They were being just friendly enough to seem innocent, just distant enough to avoid obvious impropriety. But there was an undercurrent there, a tension that had nothing to do with charity events and community outreach. Around 9:30, I excused myself to grab another beer and maybe steal 5 minutes of peace in the kitchen. That's when I overheard Tessa and Charlotte having one of their trademark gossip sessions by the back door. "Can't believe she invited him," Tessa was saying in that stage whisper she used when she wanted to be overheard. "I know, right? I mean, everyone knows they used to date," Charlotte replied. "And the way they've been looking at each other all night. Poor Alex. He has no idea what's happening right under his nose." "Oh, please. He has to know. Men aren't that oblivious." "You'd be surprised. Remember what happened with the Hendersons? Mark was the last to know about Jennifer and her tennis instructor." I stood there frozen, beer in hand, listening to these women dissect my marriage like it was the evening's entertainment. The worst part? They weren't wrong. Something was happening right under my nose, and I'd been trying to convince myself it was all in my head. That's when I heard Elise's laugh from the living room. Not her polite party laugh, but her real laugh. The one I hadn't heard directed at anything I'd said in months. I walked back toward the sound and found her and Eric standing by the fireplace, heads close together, looking at something on her phone. Whatever it was must have been hilarious, because they were both cracking up like teenagers sharing a private joke. "What's so funny?" I asked, joining their little circle. They both looked up, and for just a second I caught something in their expressions, surprise, maybe even guilt, before the polite masks slipped back into place. "Oh, just a meme Eric sent me earlier," Elise said, quickly putting her phone away. "You know how silly social media can be." Eric sent her memes. Eric was sending my wife memes, and she was saving them to laugh at later? How domestic, how intimate. "I should probably start thinking about wrapping things up," I said, looking around at the party that was supposedly in my honor. "It's getting late." "Already?" Elise looked genuinely disappointed. "But people are having such a good time." She was having a good time. That much was obvious. "I've got an early morning tomorrow," I lied. It was Saturday. "Come on, birthday boy," Eric said, clapping me on the shoulder. "The night is young. Live a little." Birthday boy. Like I was some kid who needed encouragement to stay up past his bedtime. "I think I've lived enough for one evening," I replied. That's when Jake appeared again, reading the situation with the kind of accuracy that comes from 15 years of friendship. "Actually, I should probably head out too," he announced. "Early morning." "Oh, that's too bad," Elise said, though she didn't sound particularly broken up about it. As Jake made his round saying goodbye, he pulled me aside. "You okay, man?" "Just tired," I said. He looked at me for a long moment, then glanced over at Elise and Eric, who had resumed their private conversation. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." But I wasn't sure about anything anymore. Not about my wife, not about my marriage, and definitely not about the man who was currently making himself very comfortable in my living room. Jake left, along with my coworkers and a few of the other early departures, but the core group, Elise's friends and their husbands, plus Eric, seemed settled in for the long haul. They'd moved from cocktails to wine to the expensive whiskey Eric had brought, and the conversations had gotten louder and more animated. I found myself relegated to the role of bartender and cleanup crew while Elise held court, regaling everyone with stories I'd heard a dozen times before. Eric was her most attentive audience, laughing at all the right moments, asking follow-up questions, treating her like she was the most fascinating woman in the room. Maybe she was, to him. Around 10:30, I announced I was going to start cleaning up the kitchen. Most of the guests took the hint and began making their departure noises. Tessa and Charlotte gathered their purses, the husbands looked relieved, and gradually the house began to empty. But Eric didn't leave. He helped carry dishes to the kitchen, complimented the food, and generally made himself useful in that way that was either genuinely helpful or passive-aggressively territorial, depending on your perspective. "Great party, Alex," he said as I loaded the dishwasher. "Elise really outdid herself." "She certainly did," I agreed. "You're lucky to have her," he continued. "She's special?" There was something in the way he said it that made me look up from the dishes. He was watching me carefully, like he was gauging my reaction to his words. "Yes, she is," I said slowly. "I mean, we all have history, right? but it's important to appreciate what you have in the present. We all have history. What the hell was that supposed to mean? Before I could ask, Elise appeared in the doorway. Eric, you don't have to help with the cleanup. You're a guest. I don't mind, he said, smiling at her. It's the least I can do after such a wonderful evening. Well, if you're sure... She smiled back, and I realized I was watching some kind of coded conversation I wasn't part of. Actually, I said, setting down the dish I was holding, I think we can handle it from here. It's getting pretty late. Eric checked his watch, an expensive-looking thing that probably cost more than my car payment. You're right. I should head out. He said goodbye to Elise first, another one of those lingering hugs that made my teeth ache. Then he turned to me, extending his hand again. Thanks for having me, Alex. Really, it meant a lot. Sure thing, I said, shaking his hand and wondering what exactly it had meant a lot for. After he left, the house felt different. Quieter, but also somehow emptier, like all the energy had walked out the door with him. Elise busied herself putting away leftover food and wiping down counters, humming under her breath. Good party, she said eventually. Mm-hmm. Everyone seemed to have a nice time. Especially Eric. She paused in her wiping. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, just an observation. Alex, if you have something to say, just say it. I turned to face her, this woman I'd been married to for 8 years, who was standing in our kitchen looking beautiful and distant and somehow like a stranger. I'm saying Eric seemed very comfortable here tonight, very at home. He's a friendly person. That's not a crime. No, it's not. But maybe inviting your ex-boyfriend to your husband's birthday party isn't the best idea. There it was, the thing we'd been dancing around for weeks, finally out in the open. Elise set down her dish rag and crossed her arms. Eric is not my boyfriend. He's not my ex-boyfriend. He's someone I used to date in college, and now he's a friend who lives in our community. That's it. Someone you text with every day. About the charity event? Someone you have inside jokes with. We have shared experiences. That's what happens when you've known someone for a long time. Someone who brings expensive whiskey to my birthday party and tells me how lucky I am to have you. That stopped her. He said that? He said that. She was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then she shook her head. You're reading too much into things, Alex. Eric is being friendly because he wants to fit into the community. That includes being friendly with both of us. Right, both of us. That's why he spent the entire evening talking to you and ignoring everyone else. That's not true, isn't it? We stared at each other across the kitchen island, and I could feel 8 years of marriage hanging in the balance. This was the moment where she could reassure me, where she could acknowledge that maybe the situation with Eric had gotten a little too comfortable, where she could choose her husband over her ex-boyfriend. Instead, she sighed and said, I'm too tired for this conversation tonight. Can we please just finish cleaning up? And that's when I knew. Not everything. Not the full scope of what was happening, but enough. Enough to know that my wife was choosing not to choose, which was really a choice in itself. We finished cleaning in silence, and I went to bed knowing that my 38th birthday had been the beginning of the end of something. I just didn't know yet how ugly that end was going to be. I woke up the next morning with the kind of headache that comes from drinking too much wine while watching your marriage circle the drain. Elise was already up, which wasn't unusual. She was one of those people who bounced out of bed at 6 a.m., regardless of how late she'd stayed up the night before. What was unusual was finding her in the kitchen at 7:30, still in her pajamas, texting someone and smiling. Morning, I said, heading straight for the coffee maker. Morning, she replied without looking up from her phone. Sleep well? Fine. You? This was the extent of our morning conversation these days. We'd gone from being the couple who used to spend lazy Sunday mornings in bed talking about everything and nothing, to two strangers sharing a kitchen and making polite small talk. Her phone buzzed with another message, and her smile got wider. Popular this morning, I observed. Just people thanking me for last night, she said, finally putting the phone down. Everyone had such a wonderful time. Anyone in particular? She gave me a look. Alex, please don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm asking who's texting you at 7:30 on a Sunday morning. If you must know, it was Eric. He wanted to thank us again for including him last night. Us. Right. What did he say? Just that he had a great time and appreciated the hospitality? I poured my coffee and sat down across from her. Can I see? What? The text. Can I see it? Elise's expression shifted from casual to defensive in about 2 seconds. Why would you want to see it? Because my wife is sitting in our kitchen smiling at messages from another man, and I'd like to know what's so amusing. It's not amusing, Alex. It's just polite. Then you shouldn't mind showing me. We stared at each other across the breakfast table, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. She was calculating, weighing her options, trying to figure out how to handle this without making things worse. Finally, she picked up her phone and held it out to me. Fine, here. The message was innocent enough on the surface. Thanks again for last night. Great party, great company. Hope we can do it again soon. Eh. But it was the great company part that stuck with me. Not great party, not thanks for having me. Great company. Like the party had been an excuse to spend time with specific people. See? Elise said as I handed the phone back. Perfectly normal. Hope we can do it again soon, I read aloud. What does that mean? It means he enjoyed himself and would like to be included in future social events. You know, like normal people do. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was being paranoid, just like she said. But something about the whole situation felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Max wandered into the kitchen around 8, looking like he'd been hit by a truck. At 12, he was already showing signs of inheriting my night owl tendencies, which meant mornings were generally not his strong suit. How was the party after I went to bed? He asked, grabbing a bowl for cereal. Fine, Elise said quickly. People had a nice time. Did that Eric guy stay late? Out of the mouths of babes. Even my 12-year-old son had picked up on the weird dynamic. He helped clean up a bit, Elise said. It was very thoughtful of him. Max looked at me, then at his mother, then shrugged. At 12, he was old enough to sense tension, but young enough not to want to get involved in whatever drama his parents were creating. I'm going to Tommy's later, he announced. We're working on a project for school. What kind of project? I asked. History. We're doing a presentation on famous betrayals in American politics. I nearly choked on my coffee. Betrayals? Yeah, like Benedict Arnold and stuff. People who pretended to be loyal but were actually working for the other side. Elise shot me a warning look, but Max was oblivious to the subtext of his own words. Sounds like a fascinating project, I managed. It is. Did you know that Benedict Arnold was actually a hero before he became a traitor? He won battles and everything. But then, he got greedy and decided to switch sides. People do that sometimes, I said, looking directly at Elise. They forget where their loyalties should lie. Alex, she said quietly. What? I'm just agreeing with Max. It's an interesting historical phenomenon. Max finished his cereal and headed upstairs to get dressed, leaving Elise and me alone again. The silence stretched between us until she finally spoke. We need to talk. I thought we were talking. Really talk. About what happened last night, about Eric, about all of this. I set down my coffee mug and gave her my full attention. Okay, let's talk. She took a deep breath, like she was preparing for something difficult. I know you're uncomfortable with Eric being back in town. I get that. But Alex, he's not going anywhere. He lives here now, he's part of the community, and we're going to run into him at social events. I understand that. Do you? Because last night you acted like he was some kind of threat. Wasn't he? No, he was a guest at your birthday party. Our friend. Your friend Elise. Not our friend. Your friend. Fine. My friend. But that doesn't mean there's anything inappropriate happening. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. She looked sincere, but then again, Elise had always been good at looking sincere when she wanted something. Help me understand something, I said. You dated this guy in college, right? Briefly. We were together for maybe 6 months. And how did it end? She hesitated. We just grew apart. Wanted different things. Who ended it? Does it matter? It might. Another pause. It was mutual. Mutual breakups are rare, Elise. Usually someone gets dumped. Fine. If you must know, I ended it. I broke up with him because I wanted to focus on my studies, and he was getting too serious too fast. Too serious too fast. That was interesting. And now he's back, and you're friends. Yes. And he's single? As far as I know. And you're married? Obviously. So help me understand why a single guy who used to be serious about you would want to be friends with you now that you're married with a kid? Elise's jaw tightened. Maybe because he's a mature adult who can have platonic relationships with people from his past. Or maybe because he's still interested in you. That's ridiculous. Is it? Because from where I was standing last night, he looked pretty interested. You're being paranoid again. There was that word. Paranoid. Her favorite way of shutting down any conversation she didn't want to have. Am I? Or am I being observant? She stood up abruptly, gathering her coffee mug and the breakfast dishes. I don't want to fight about this, Alex. Eric is a friend. That's all he is. That's all he's ever going to be. If you can't accept that, then we have bigger problems than I thought. She left the kitchen without another word, and I sat there wondering when my wife had become someone I didn't recognize. The Elise I'd married 8 years ago would have understood my concerns. She would have been willing to set boundaries, to prioritize our marriage over a friendship that was making her husband uncomfortable. This Elise was different. This Elise was defensive and dismissive, and acting like I was the problem for having perfectly reasonable concerns about her relationship with her ex-boyfriend. I spent the rest of Sunday trying to shake off the feeling that my marriage was in trouble. I did yard work, watched football, helped Max with his homework, normal Sunday activities that should have felt normal, but somehow didn't. Elise spent most of the day on her laptop, supposedly working on some project for her PR job, but I noticed she checked her phone frequently, and every time she did, she got that little smile that I was starting to hate. Monday morning brought a return to routine. I had an early meeting with a client who was concerned about their network security, which was ironic considering I was starting to worry about the security of my own home network. Not from hackers, but from the secrets that seemed to be multiplying in my own house. The meeting went well, but I found myself distracted, thinking about Elise and Eric and the way they'd looked at each other during the party. By the time I got back to the office, I'd made a decision that probably wasn't entirely rational, but felt necessary. I called Jake. "Hey, man," he answered on the second ring. "How are you feeling after Saturday night?" "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. You free for lunch?" "Sure. Everything okay?" "I'll explain when I see you." We met at a sports bar downtown, the kind of place where you could have a private conversation without worrying about running into anyone from our social circle. Jake was already there when I arrived, nursing a beer and looking concerned. "So," he said after I'd ordered, "what's going on?" I told him everything. The texting, the charity event excuse, the way Eric had acted at the party, the conversation I'd overheard between Tessa and Charlotte. Jake listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or raising an eyebrow, but mostly just letting me get it all out. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," he said finally. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about the answer." "Shoot." "Do you think Elise is cheating on you?" The question hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. It was the question I'd been avoiding, the one I didn't want to ask myself because I was afraid of the answer. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't think it's physical. Not yet. But emotionally? Yeah, I think she's already halfway out the door." Jake nodded slowly. "That's what I was afraid you were going to say." "Why? Did you see something at the party?" "I saw enough. The way she looked at him, the way he looked at her. Alex, I've known you guys for 8 years, and I've never seen Elise act like that around another man." "Act like what?" "Alive. Interested. Like she was actually enjoying herself instead of just going through the motions." That hurt, but it also confirmed what I'd been feeling. For months, maybe even longer, Elise had been going through the motions with me, with our marriage, with our family, with our life together. But put Eric in the room, and suddenly she was animated and engaged and everything I remembered her being when we first met. "So what do I do?" I asked. "That depends. How much do you want to know?" "What do you mean?" Jake leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I mean, you could confront her directly, demand she cut contact with Eric, and hope she chooses you. Or you could do some digging first, find out exactly what you're dealing with before you make any moves." "Digging?" "Alex, you work in cybersecurity. You know how to find information when you need to. The question is whether you want to know what you might find." He was right. I had the skills to investigate my own wife's activities if I wanted to. I could check phone records, monitor internet usage, track social media interactions. The tools were all there. The question was whether I was ready to use them. "I need to think about this," I said. "Fair enough. But Alex, whatever you decide to do, don't wait too long. In my experience, these situations don't get better on their own. They just get more complicated." I went back to work that afternoon with Jake's words echoing in my head. Don't wait too long. These situations don't get better on their own. But I wasn't ready to start spying on my wife. Not yet. First, I was going to try one more time to handle this like adults, to have an honest conversation about what was happening and what we were going to do about it. That evening, after Max had gone to bed, I found Elise in our home office working on her laptop. She looked up when I knocked on the door frame. "Hey," she said. "How was your day?" "Good. Busy. Can we talk?" She saved whatever she was working on and closed the laptop. "Sure. What's up?" I sat down in the chair across from her desk, trying to figure out how to start this conversation without it immediately turning into a fight. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday morning, about Eric being part of the community now, about us running into him at social events. Okay, and you're right. He's not going anywhere, and we're going to have to deal with that. She looked cautiously optimistic. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. But I need you to understand something too. The way things are right now, with the constant texting and the private jokes and the way you two interact, it's not working for me. Her expression hardened slightly. What do you mean? I mean, I need you to set some boundaries. If Eric is going to be part of our social circle, then he needs to be part of our social circle, not just yours. The secret communications and the private meetings need to stop. They're not secret, Alex, and they're not private meetings. We're planning a charity event. Then include me. If it's really just about charity work, then there's no reason I can't be part of the planning process. She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her weighing her options again. Finally, she nodded. You're right. I should have included you from the beginning. It's just that you seemed so uncomfortable with Eric that I thought it would be easier if I handled the charity stuff myself. Easier for who? For everyone. But you're right. If we're going to do this, we should do it together. It felt like a small victory, but I wasn't entirely convinced. There was something in her tone, something that suggested she was agreeing because it was the path of least resistance, not because she actually understood my concerns. So what exactly are you planning? I asked. A fitness challenge fundraiser for the community center. People pay to participate in different events. 5K run, obstacle course, group fitness classes, and all the proceeds go to the center's youth programs. That actually sounds like a good cause. It is. Eric has a lot of experience with fitness events, and I have the PR background to promote it. It seemed like a natural partnership. Partnership. There was that word again. When is this supposed to happen? We're thinking sometime in the spring. It takes months to organize something like this properly. Months. They were planning to work together for months. And how often do you need to meet to plan this? I don't know. Once a week? Maybe twice if we're getting close to the event. Once or twice a week. For months. With her ex-boyfriend, who was obviously still interested in her. Where do these meetings happen? Usually at the coffee shop downtown, sometimes at the gym if we need to look at the space. Public places at least. That was something. I'd like to come to the next one, I said. Really? Really. If this is something we're doing as a family, then I should be involved. Alex, you don't have to. I want to. Unless there's a reason you don't want me there? Another pause. Another calculation. No, of course not. I'll let Eric know you're interested in helping. Great. When's the next meeting? Thursday, 7 o'clock at Starbucks on Main Street. I'll be there. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Good. I think it'll be fun to work on this together. Fun. Right. As I got ready for bed that night, I felt like I'd accomplished something. I'd addressed the situation directly, set clear boundaries, and found a way to keep an eye on what was happening between Elise and Eric. It was a reasonable adult approach to a difficult situation. But deep down, I had a feeling that Thursday's meeting was going to tell me everything I needed to know about the state of my marriage. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that conversation. Thursday evening couldn't come fast enough, and at the same time, I was dreading it like a root canal. I spent the entire day at work trying to focus on client security assessments while my brain kept drifting to what I might discover at 7 o'clock. I arrived at the Starbucks on Main Street at 6:55, ordered a large coffee I didn't really want, and found a table with a clear view of the entrance. Eric was already there, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall like some kind of fitness-themed mob boss. He was wearing another one of those expensive casual shirts that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, and he was checking his phone with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was doing more than just scrolling through social media. At exactly 7 o'clock, Elise walked through the door, and I watched Eric's face light up like Christmas morning. He stood up to greet her, actually stood up, like they were on a date instead of having a business meeting, and she gave him another one of those lingering hugs that made my coffee taste like acid. I waited until they'd settled into their booth and pulled out what looked like planning materials before walking over. Hey, I said, approaching their table with my coffee in hand. They both looked up, and for just a second, I caught that same expression I'd seen at the party, surprise, maybe even annoyance, before the polite masks slipped back into place. Alex, Elise said, scooting over to make room for me. I'm so glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, sitting down next to my wife and extending a hand to Eric. Good to see you again. Likewise, Eric said, shaking my hand with that same overly firm grip. Elise tells me you're interested in helping with the fundraiser. Very interested. I think it's a great cause. Absolutely. The community center does amazing work with at-risk youth. Any support we can give them is worthwhile. So far, so good. We were all being perfectly civil, perfectly appropriate, just 3 community-minded adults planning a charity event. So, I said, pulling out a small notebook I'd brought, what's the current plan? Elise and Eric exchanged a quick glance, and then Elise pulled out a folder full of papers. We've been working on the basic framework. The idea is to have multiple events throughout the day so people of different fitness levels can participate. She spread out what looked like a rough schedule. 5K run in the morning, obstacle course in the afternoon, group fitness classes throughout the day, and a community dinner in the evening. This looks comprehensive, I said, studying the papers. How many participants are you expecting? We're hoping for at least 200, Eric said, maybe more if we get good community buy-in. And what's the fundraising goal? $25,000, Elise replied. That would fund the youth programs for an entire year. I had to admit, it was an ambitious and well-thought-out plan. If this really was just about charity work, then I'd been wrong to be suspicious. But then I noticed something. These notes, I said, pointing to some handwritten comments in the margins of the schedule, they look like they're from multiple meetings. How long have you two been working on this? Another glance between them. A few weeks, Elise said. We wanted to have a solid framework before we brought anyone else in. A few weeks. But Eric had only been at my birthday party 3 days ago, and that was supposedly when Elise had first mentioned including me in the planning. And you've been meeting weekly? Sometimes twice a week, Eric said. There's a lot to coordinate. Twice a week for a few weeks. That was a lot of meetings for a charity event that was still months away. I see you've already contacted some potential sponsors, I observed, looking at a list of local businesses. How did those conversations go? Really well, Eric said, and I noticed he answered instead of Elise, even though she was supposedly the one with PR experience. Most of the business owners are excited to support the community center. That's great. Which businesses have you spoken to? Eric rattled off a list of about 8 local companies, including several I'd never heard of. When I asked about specific contacts or commitments, his answers got vaguer. We're still in the preliminary stages, he said, getting a feel for interest levels before we make formal proposals. Makes sense. And what about permits? Insurance? Liability waivers? The questions seemed to catch them off guard. Eric looked at Elise, who looked back at him. We're still researching those requirements, Elise said finally. I might be able to help with that. I've dealt with event insurance through some of my corporate clients. There are specific requirements for fitness-related activities, especially obstacle courses. That would be great, Eric said, but he didn't sound particularly enthusiastic about my offer to help. We spent the next 30 minutes going through their plans in detail, and the more questions I asked, the more apparent it became that this charity event was still very much in the conceptual stage. They had big ideas and rough schedules, but very little in the way of concrete planning or actual commitments, which raised the question, if they weren't really planning a charity event yet, what had they been doing in all those meetings? So what's the next step? I asked as we started packing up the papers. We need to start reaching out to the community center officially, Elise said, get their formal approval and support. Have you not done that yet? We wanted to have a solid proposal first, Eric explained. No point in approaching them with half-formed ideas. Half-formed ideas that had required twice weekly meetings for several weeks. Right. I know someone on the community center board, I said. I could make an introduction. Oh, that's not necessary, Elise said quickly. We don't want to impose on your connections. It's not an imposition. I'm part of the planning team now, right? Of course, but great. I'll reach out to them tomorrow and set up a meeting for all 3 of us. The look that passed between Elise and Eric was unmistakable this time. They were not happy about this development. Actually, Eric said, it might be better if Elise and I handle the initial approach. We've been working on this from the beginning, so we know all the details. But now I know the details too. And having a third person, especially someone with business connections in the community, could be helpful. Alex, Elise said, putting her hand on my arm, maybe we should discuss this at home first. Discuss what? Whether I should help with the charity event I just volunteered to help with? The tension at the table was becoming impossible to ignore. We were 3 adults supposedly planning a fundraiser for underprivileged kids, and it felt like a hostage negotiation. You know what? Eric said, standing up. Why don't you 2 talk about it and let me know what you decide? I should probably head out anyway. You don't have to leave, Elise said, and there was something almost desperate in her voice. It's fine. I've got an early morning tomorrow. He gathered his papers and looked at me. Alex, thanks for your interest in the project. I'm sure we can find a way for everyone to contribute. He shook my hand again, gave Elise another hug goodbye, and left. Through the window, I watched him walk to his red Camaro, get in, and sit there for a moment before driving away. He looked like a man who was trying to figure out how his evening had gone so wrong. Well, I said, turning back to Elise, that was interesting. What do you mean? I mean, your charity planning partner seemed pretty uncomfortable with the idea of me being involved in the charity planning. He wasn't uncomfortable. He was just surprised. We've been working on this together, and suddenly there's a third person with different ideas. Different ideas like actually contacting the community center and getting proper permits? Elise's jaw tightened. We were going to do all of that. When? You've been meeting for weeks, but you haven't even talked to the people you're supposedly raising money for. It's called preparation, Alex. We wanted to have our ducks in a row before we started making official commitments. Or maybe you wanted an excuse to keep meeting with your ex-boyfriend twice a week. There it was, the thing we'd both been dancing around all evening. That's not fair, she said. Isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, this whole charity event looks like an excuse for you two to spend time together. You're being paranoid again. Am I? Because I just spent an hour listening to you two talk about a fundraiser that doesn't seem to exist yet, for an organization you haven't contacted, with sponsors you haven't actually spoken to, but somehow you've needed multiple meetings a week to plan this non-event. Elise gathered up her papers and stood up. I don't want to have this conversation here. Fine, let's have it at home. The drive back to our house was silent, but it was the kind of silence that screams louder than any argument. I could practically feel Elise's anger radiating from the passenger seat, and I was sure she could feel mine right back. Max was at a friend's house for the evening, which meant we could have this fight without worrying about traumatizing our son. Small mercies. Okay, I said, as soon as we walked through the front door. Let's talk. About what? About how you embarrassed me in front of Eric? About how you turned a simple planning meeting into an interrogation? I asked basic questions about a charity event, Elise. If that felt like an interrogation, maybe it's because you don't have good answers. We have plenty of answers. We just weren't expecting to be cross-examined by someone who's never organized a community event in his life. You're right. I've never organized a community event, but I have organized corporate events, client presentations, and security assessments. And when I'm planning something real, I have real answers to real questions. She threw her purse on the kitchen counter and turned to face me. What exactly are you accusing me of, Alex? I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking you to be honest with me about what's really going on between you and Eric. I've been honest. We're friends. We're planning a charity event. That's it. Friends who meet twice a week to plan an event that doesn't exist yet. It does exist. We're just in the early stages. Friends who text each other every day about charity work but never seem to have anything concrete to show for it. Planning takes time. Friends who hug like lovers and look at each other like they're sharing secrets. That's in your head, Alex. Is it? Because everyone at the party noticed it too. Tessa and Charlotte were talking about it. Jake saw it. Even Max picked up on the weird dynamic. For the first time, Elise looked genuinely surprised. What did Max say? He asked why you invited Eric to my birthday party. A 12-year-old could see that something was off. She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her processing this information. Finally, she sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. Alex, I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth. About Eric, about your relationship with him, about what's really happening here. She looked up at me, and for a second, I saw something vulnerable in her expression, something that reminded me of the woman I'd married. The truth is complicated, she said softly. Try me. She took a deep breath. When Eric came back to town, I was, curious, I guess. We had history, and I wondered what kind of person he'd become. Okay. And when we started talking, it was nice. He remembered things about me, about who I used to be before I became a wife and mother and suburban PR manager. He made me feel like I was still interesting. There it was, the thing I'd been afraid to hear but needed to understand. And I don't make you feel interesting. You make me feel loved, Alex. You make me feel secure and comfortable and safe, but interesting? When was the last time we had a conversation about something other than Max's homework or the mortgage payment or what we're having for dinner? It was a fair point, and it hit harder than I wanted to admit. When had we stopped being interested in each other? When had our marriage become a series of logistical discussions and polite domestic interactions? So you started meeting with Eric because he makes you feel interesting. I started meeting with Eric because we really are planning a charity event. But yes, I also enjoy his company. He's different from the other people in our social circle. Different how? More adventurous, more spontaneous, more willing to take risks. More everything I wasn't, in other words. And the charity event is real. We really are planning it. But you're right that it's also been an excuse to spend time together. At least she was being honest now. That was something. Are you attracted to him, Elise? Another long pause. Yes. The word hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting it. Are you sleeping with him? No. Alex, no. I would never. I haven't cheated on you. But you want to. I don't know. Maybe. I'm confused about a lot of things right now. We sat there in our kitchen, 8 years of marriage spread out between us like a crime scene, and I tried to figure out what came next. My wife had just admitted she was attracted to another man, that she'd been using charity work as an excuse to spend time with him, that he made her feel things I apparently didn't. But she also said she hadn't cheated, and despite everything, I believed her. Elise was many things, but she wasn't a liar. If she said nothing physical had happened, then nothing physical had happened yet. So what do you want to do? I asked finally. I don't know. I love you, Alex. I love our family, our life together. But I also feel like I'm disappearing into it, like I'm becoming this person I don't recognize, and I don't know how to get back to who I used to be. And Eric makes you feel like who you used to be? Yes? The person you were before you married me. That's not what I meant, isn't it? She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our perfectly manicured suburban street. This was the life we'd built together. The house, the neighborhood, the social circle, the routine. It was safe and comfortable and predictable. And apparently, it was slowly killing my wife's spirit. I need some time to think about this, I said. Alex, please, I don't want this to ruin us. I needed to be honest with you. I appreciate the honesty, but I need to figure out what to do with it. What does that mean? I turned back to face her. It means I need to decide whether I'm willing to fight for our marriage or whether I'm going to step aside and let you figure out what you really want. I don't want you to step aside. But you don't want to give up Eric either. She didn't answer, which told me everything I needed to know. That night, I slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. It wasn't a dramatic gesture or a punishment. I just needed space to think without having to pretend everything was normal. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized that the charity event meeting had given me exactly what I'd been looking for. The truth. Not the whole truth, maybe, but enough of it to understand what I was dealing with. My wife was having an emotional affair with her ex-boyfriend. She was attracted to him, enjoyed his company, and was using their friendship as a way to explore feelings she wasn't ready to admit she had. The question now was what I was going to do about it. I could demand she cut off all contact with Eric, give her an ultimatum, and hope she chose our marriage over her attraction to him. But ultimatums rarely worked, and even if she agreed, I'd always wonder if she was just going through the motions while secretly resenting me for making her give up something that made her feel alive. Or I could try to become more like Eric, more adventurous, more spontaneous, more interesting, but that felt like trying to win back my own wife by pretending to be someone else, which seemed like a losing proposition all around. Or I could accept that our marriage might be over and start planning accordingly. None of the options were good, but at least now I knew what I was dealing with. And knowledge, as they say in my line of work, is power. I just had to figure out how to use it. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange kind of limbo. Elise and I were polite to each other, civil in front of Max, and completely honest about the fact that we were both trying to figure out what came next. She didn't mention Eric, and I didn't ask about him, but his presence hung over our house like smoke from a fire you can't quite locate. I threw myself into work, taking on extra clients and staying late at the office. It was easier than coming home to the awkward dance we were doing around each other. Elise seemed to be doing the same thing, suddenly finding urgent projects that required her attention in the evenings and weekends. Max, being 12 and more observant than we gave him credit for, definitely noticed something was wrong. "Are you and Mom getting divorced?" he asked me one Saturday morning while we were making pancakes. Elise had gone to the gym, Eric's gym, I assumed, though I didn't ask. "Why would you think that?" I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. "Because you're acting weird, like polite weird, like when Tommy's parents got divorced and they stopped fighting but also stopped talking to each other." Smart kid. Too smart for his own good. "Mom and I are working through some things," I said carefully. "But we both love you very much, and that's never going to change." That's exactly what Tommy's parents said. I flipped a pancake and tried to figure out how to handle this conversation. Max deserved honesty, but he also deserved to be a kid for as long as possible. Sometimes adults have to figure out complicated things, I said finally. It doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong. It just means we need to make sure we're making the right choices for everyone. Is it because of that Eric guy? I nearly dropped the spatula. What makes you ask that? I'm not stupid, Dad. I saw how Mom acted around him at your party, and she's been texting someone a lot lately, and she gets that weird smile when she does it. 12 years old, and he'd already figured out what I'd been trying to deny for months. It's complicated, buddy. Adults always say that when they don't want to explain something. He wasn't wrong. Okay, here's the truth. Mom and I are trying to figure out if we're still happy being married to each other. Sometimes people grow apart, even when they love each other, and sometimes they have to make hard choices about what's best for everyone. Max was quiet for a moment, processing this. But you're still going to be my dad, right? Always. No matter what happens between Mom and me, I'm always going to be your dad. That's a job I never want to quit. Good, because you make better pancakes than Mom does. Crisis averted, at least temporarily. But the conversation with Max made me realize that our current situation wasn't sustainable. We couldn't keep pretending everything was fine while we figured out our marriage in slow motion. It wasn't fair to any of us, especially not to Max. That evening, after Max had gone to bed, I found Elise in the living room reading a book. Or pretending to read a book. She'd been on the same page for 10 minutes. We need to make a decision, I said, sitting down across from her. She looked up, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The past 2 weeks had been as hard on her as they had been on me. About what? About us, about Eric, about what we're doing here. She closed the book and set it aside. I know. Max asked me this morning if we were getting divorced. Oh God, what did you tell him? The truth, that we're trying to figure out if we're still happy being married to each other. She winced. How did he take it? Better than I expected. But Alex, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep living in the same house and pretending we're working things out when we're really just avoiding the hard conversations. So, what do you want to do? I'd been thinking about this for 2 weeks, and I'd finally come to a conclusion that surprised even me. I want you to go out with him. What? Eric, I want you to go out with him, on a real date. Do whatever it is you've been wanting to do but haven't because you're married to me. Elise stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Alex, I can't do that. Why not? Because I'm married to you. But you want to. You said so yourself. You're attracted to him, you enjoy his company, he makes you feel interesting and adventurous and all the things I apparently don't make you feel anymore. That doesn't mean I'm going to act on it, but you want to. And as long as you want to, you're going to keep being conflicted about our marriage. You're going to keep wondering what if, and I'm going to keep wondering when the other shoe is going to drop. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her trying to process what I was suggesting. So, you're giving me permission to cheat on you? I'm giving you permission to figure out what you really want. If that means going out with Eric, then go out with Eric. If it means something more than that, then we'll deal with it when it happens. And what about us? What about our marriage? Our marriage will be here when you get back, if you want to come back. Alex, this is crazy. Is it? Because the alternative is spending the next 6 months or a year slowly torturing each other while you try to convince yourself you don't want something you clearly do want. And that's not fair to anyone. What if I go out with him and realize I want to be with him instead of you? Then at least we'll both know where we stand. And what if I go out with him and realize I want to stay married to you? Then we'll figure out how to make our marriage better. She stood up and started pacing around the living room, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. I can't believe you're suggesting this. I can't believe I'm suggesting it either. But Elise, we're stuck. We've been stuck for months. This is the only way I can think of to get unstuck. By encouraging my wife to date another man. By giving my wife the space to figure out what she really wants. She stopped pacing and looked at me. What if what I really want is both? What if I want to stay married to you, but also want to explore things with Eric? Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Alex, I don't think you've thought this through. I've thought about nothing else for 2 weeks. This is the only solution I can come up with that doesn't involve ultimatums or pretending or slowly destroying each other. And you're really okay with this? I wasn't okay with it. I was terrified, but I was more terrified of the alternative. I'm okay with finding out the truth, whatever that truth turns out to be. She sat back down, and we looked at each other across the coffee table that had been witness to 8 years of marriage, good times and bad times, arguments and reconciliations, plans and dreams and disappointments. If I do this, she said slowly, there have to be rules. Okay, what kind of rules? The complete honesty, about everything. What happens, how I feel, what I'm thinking. Agreed. And this goes both ways. If you decide you can't handle it, if you change your mind, you have to tell me immediately. Agreed. And Max doesn't know. Whatever happens between us, he doesn't get dragged into it until we've figured out where we stand. Absolutely. And if I decide I want to stop, if I decide I want to work on our marriage instead, you don't get to throw this back in my face later. I won't. She was quiet for another long moment, and I could see her weighing the decision. I need to think about this, she said finally. Take all the time you need. What will you do while I'm figuring things out? I don't know. Work on myself, I guess. Try to figure out how I became the kind of husband whose wife needs to date other people to figure out if she wants to stay married to him. Alex, this isn't about you not being enough, isn't it? It's about me not knowing who I am anymore, and maybe needing to remember who I was before I can figure out who I want to be. And Eric helps you remember who you were. Yes. The person you were before you married me. The person I was before I became afraid to take risks or try new things or be spontaneous. And you think I made you afraid of those things? I think our life together made me afraid of those things. The mortgage and the social obligations and the need to be responsible all the time. It's not your fault, Alex. It's just what happens when you build a life with someone. But Eric represents a different kind of life. Eric represents the person I used to be, and I need to know if that person is still in there somewhere, or if she's gone forever. I understood, even though it hurt like hell. She wasn't just choosing between me and Eric. She was choosing between the life we'd built together and the life she might have had if she'd made different choices. Okay, I said, then go find out. 3 days later, Elise came home from work with a strange expression on her face. I texted Eric, she said without preamble. And? I asked him if he wanted to have dinner tomorrow night, just the two of us. What did he say? He said yes. So it was happening. My wife was going on a date with another man, with my permission, to figure out if she wanted to stay married to me. How do you feel about it? I asked. Terrified, excited, guilty, confused. She paused. How do you feel about it? All of the same things. Alex, are you sure about this? No. I wasn't sure about anything, but I was sure that the alternative, continuing to pretend everything was fine while she slowly pulled away from me, was worse. I'm sure I want you to be happy, I said, and I'm sure I want to know what we're really dealing with. What if this ruins everything? What if it saves everything? She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. And honestly, I had the same doubts. What I was suggesting was either the most mature thing I'd ever done or the stupidest. Probably both. Where are you going? I asked. That new Italian place downtown, Romano's. Nice choice. Alex, this is weird. Everything about this situation is weird, but weird doesn't mean wrong. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. In less than 24 hours, my wife was going to have dinner with another man while I stayed home with our son, pretending everything was normal. But the thing was, nothing had been normal for months. At least now we were going to find out what abnormal actually looked like. And maybe, if we were very lucky, we'd figure out how to get back to normal. Or find a new normal that worked for all of us. Or maybe I'd just given my wife permission to leave me. I guess I was about to find out. The next day crawled. I dropped Lucas at soccer practice, answered emails on autopilot, picked him up, made spaghetti for dinner, his favorite, and tried not to watch the clock. Elise showered, did her makeup with more care than usual, chose the navy dress I'd always liked, the one that hugged her hips just right. When she came downstairs, she looked beautiful and heartbreakingly distant. You look nice, I said, meaning it. Thanks. She hesitated at the door, keys in hand. I won't be late. Probably back by 10. Take your time, I told her, really. She kissed my cheek, quick, almost sisterly, then bent to hug Lucas goodbye. Be good for Daddy, okay? Love you. Love you too, Mommy. The door closed. The house felt instantly smaller, quieter, colder. Lucas and I played Uno on the living room floor. He won 3 hands in a row because I kept forgetting to call Uno. My mind was elsewhere, picturing Elise laughing at one of Eric's stories, the way she used to laugh at mine, picturing his hand brushing hers when he passed the breadbasket, picturing her realizing she'd made a mistake staying with me. At 8:47 p.m., Lucas asked, Is Mommy on a date? I froze. What makes you say that? She put on fancy shoes and perfume. She only does that when it's special. Kids notice everything. Yeah, I said. She's having dinner with a friend from work. Grown-up stuff. Is the friend a boy? Yes. He thought about that. Are you sad? A little, I admitted. But sometimes grown-ups have to figure things out, even when it's hard. He nodded solemnly. Like when you and Mommy argued about the dishwasher? I almost laughed. Sort of, but bigger. We finished the game. I tucked him in, read 2 chapters of The Hobbit, kissed his forehead. When I came back downstairs, the silence pressed in harder. I poured a glass of bourbon, something I rarely did, and sat on the couch with my phone face down. No checking, no texting. That was the deal we'd made. No tracking, no interrogating. Trust, or at least the attempt at it. At 9:32, the front door opened. Elise stepped inside, coat still on, cheeks flushed from the cold, or maybe from wine. She looked different. Not guilty exactly, not elated, just unsettled. You're early, I said. He had an early flight tomorrow, business trip. She hung her coat, kicked off her heels. Can we talk? I nodded, heart thudding so loud I was sure she could hear it. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd planned Lucas's 5th birthday, where we'd fought about money, where we'd once made love after everyone else was asleep. She folded her hands. It was nice, really nice. He listened. He asked questions about my work, about Lucas, about the garden project I've been putting off. He remembered things I'd told him months ago, little details. I swallowed. And it felt easy, light, like I could breathe without explaining every choice I'd ever made. She met my eyes, but it also felt wrong. Not because of him, because of us. Because every time I laughed, I thought about how long it's been since I laughed like that with you. I waited. He kissed me goodnight, she said quietly, in the parking lot, just once, soft. I didn't stop him. The words landed like a punch I'd been bracing for. Still, hearing them out loud made my chest cave. Did you want to? I asked. Yes. She didn't look away. And no, I wanted to feel wanted, desired. But when his lips touched mine, all I could think about was coming home to you, to this house, to Lucas asleep upstairs, to the life we actually have, not the one I imagined when I was 25 and scared of missing out. I exhaled slowly. So what now? I told him I can't see him again. Not like that. I don't know if that means the feelings will go away. They might not. But I know I don't want to keep chasing a fantasy while the real thing is right here falling apart. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Alex. I'm so sorry I let it get this far. I was lonely. I was afraid we'd become roommates instead of partners. I thought maybe someone else would make me feel alive again. But the truth is, I've been waiting for you to fight for us. And instead, I almost walked away. I reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. I should have seen it sooner. I got comfortable, complacent. I thought love was enough to coast on. It isn't. She squeezed my hand. Can we try again? Not pretend nothing happened, but rebuild, counseling maybe, date nights, honesty, even when it's ugly. Yeah, I said. I want that more than anything. We sat there a long time, hands linked, the kitchen clock ticking softly. Outside, snow had started falling, fat flakes drifting past the window like slow-motion confetti. Eventually she stood, pulled me up with her. Come to bed? I followed her upstairs. We didn't make love, not yet. That would come later, when the raw edges had smoothed. Instead, we lay facing each other in the dark, breathing in sync, talking in whispers about small things. Lucas's upcoming science fair, the leak in the guest bathroom, whether we should repaint the hallway. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no guarantees. Eric's kiss would linger in both our memories. The doubts might resurface on bad days. But for the first time in months, we were choosing the same direction, toward each other instead of away. The next morning, Lucas bounded into the kitchen, saw us making pancakes together, and grinned. You're both here. We are, Elise said, ruffling his hair. Are you friends again? I glanced at her. She smiled, small, tentative. Real. Better, she said. We're trying to be a team again. He seemed satisfied with that. Later, after he left for school, Elise turned to me at the sink. Thank you for letting me go last night. I know it cost you. It did, I admitted, but keeping you against your will would have cost more. She kissed me then, slow, deliberate, tasting faintly of maple syrup and forgiveness. We weren't fixed, not even close, but we were starting. And sometimes starting, together, is the bravest thing two people can do. Elise left for her date at 6:30 on Friday evening, wearing a blue dress I hadn't seen before and looking more nervous than I'd seen her since our wedding day. She kissed me goodbye, actually kissed me, which felt surreal under the circumstances, and promised to be home by 10. "Have fun," I said, and meant it, even though the words tasted like sawdust in my mouth. Max was spending the night at his friend Tommy's house, which was probably for the best. I wasn't sure I could maintain a facade of normalcy while my wife was out with another man. I ordered pizza, opened a beer, and tried to watch a movie, but I couldn't concentrate on anything except the clock on the wall and the question spinning through my head. Were they having a good time? Was she laughing at his jokes? Was she remembering why she'd been attracted to him in college? Was she falling in love with him? At 8:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Elise. "Everything okay at home?" I stared at the message for a full minute before responding. "All good. Hope you're having a nice time. Thank you for this. I know it's not easy." She was right. It wasn't easy. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and I still wasn't sure if it was the right thing. At 10:15, I heard her car in the driveway. She was 15 minutes late, which could mean anything or nothing. I tried not to read too much into it. She came through the front door looking different. Not disheveled or guilty or obviously post-date, just different. Thoughtful, maybe, like someone who'd just had an important conversation. "Hey," she said, hanging up her purse. "Hey, how was dinner?" "Good. The food was excellent." "And the company?" She sat down on the couch next to me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. "Can we talk about it?" That was the deal. She kicked off her heels and curled her legs under her, and for a moment she looked like the woman I'd married 8 years ago. "It was nice," she said carefully. "Really nice. He's easy to talk to. He's funny and charming, and he made me feel like the most interesting person in the restaurant." My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. "That sounds like a good date." It was. But Alex, it was also weird. The whole time, I kept thinking about you, about us, about what I was doing and why I was doing it. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that Eric represents this fantasy version of my life. The version where I stayed single longer, traveled more, took more risks. Where I didn't settle down in the suburbs and become a soccer mom. And fantasies are nice, but they're not real. Eric doesn't know that I hate doing laundry, or that I cry during sad commercials, or that I have anxiety attacks when I have to speak in public. He knows the edited version of me, the highlight reel. But he makes you feel interesting. He makes me feel like a character in a story, but you make me feel like a real person." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not. "Did anything happen?" I asked. "Besides dinner?" "He walked me to my car. He tried to kiss me." My heart stopped. And I let him. There it was, the thing I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. How was it? Disappointing. That was not the answer I'd been expecting. Disappointing how? It felt like kissing a stranger, like kissing someone I used to know a long time ago but don't really know anymore. There was no connection, no spark, just two people going through the motions of something that used to mean something. I didn't know what to say to that. "Alex, I think I've been in love with the idea of Eric more than I've been in love with Eric himself. Does that make sense?" "I think so. He's this symbol of the person I used to be, the life I didn't choose, but when I was actually with him, all I could think about was how much I missed you, how much I missed us. Even though I'm boring and predictable and not adventurous? You're not boring, Alex. You're steady. You're reliable. You're the person who remembers to pay the electric bill and helps Max with his homework and knows exactly how I like my coffee in the morning. Eric doesn't know any of those things about me because he's never been part of my real life. But you said he makes you feel interesting. He makes me feel like I'm performing, like I'm putting on a show of being interesting. But with you, I don't have to perform. I can just be myself, even when myself is tired or cranky or wearing sweatpants and no makeup. So what does this mean?" She moved closer to me on the couch, close enough that I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "It means I want to work on our marriage, really work on it. Not just go through the motions or pretend everything is fine, but actually figure out how to be interesting to each other again." "And Eric?" "I'm going to tell him that dinner was lovely, but that I need to focus on my marriage, that I can't keep using our friendship as an escape from my real life." I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been tight for months. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Alex, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I put you through this. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't enough. I'm sorry I almost threw away the best thing in my life because I was having some kind of midlife crisis. You don't have to apologize for having feelings. I have to apologize for how I handled them. I should have talked to you about what I was going through instead of seeking attention from another man. That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to our marriage. I pulled her closer, and she curled up against my side like she used to do when we were first married. So what now? I asked. Now we figure out how to fall in love with each other again, how to be adventurous together instead of apart, how to make our real life as exciting as any fantasy. That sounds like a lot of work. The best things usually are. We sat there on our couch in our suburban living room, holding each other and talking about the future for the first time in months. It felt like coming home after a long, difficult trip, but even as I held my wife and listened to her talk about working on our marriage, part of me wondered if it was really going to be that simple. Could she really just walk away from Eric after months of emotional intimacy? Could we really rebuild what we'd almost lost? I wanted to believe it was possible, but I also knew that the real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, when the novelty of our reconciliation wore off and we had to do the actual work of becoming interesting to each other again. The next morning, Elise called Eric while I was making breakfast. I could hear her side of the conversation from the kitchen. Eric, hi, do you have a few minutes to talk? Yes, about last night. I had a lovely time, but I need to be honest with you about something. I can't keep seeing you. I need to focus on my marriage. I know, and I'm sorry if I gave you mixed signals. No, it's not about you. You're wonderful. It's about me figuring out what I really want. I hope we can still be friends, but I understand if you need some space. Thank you for understanding. Take care. She came into the kitchen looking relieved and sad at the same time. How did he take it? I asked. Better than I expected. He said he'd been wondering if I was really ready to leave my marriage or if I was just going through a rough patch. And what did you tell him? The truth? That I was going through a rough patch, and I'm sorry I dragged him into it. Do you think he'll respect your decision? I think so. Eric's not a bad guy, Alex. He's not you. Max came home that afternoon full of stories about his sleepover, and for the first time in months, our house felt like a home again. We made dinner together, watched a movie, and went to bed early. But as I drifted off to sleep with Elise curled up next to me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our story, not the end. We'd figured out that we wanted to stay married, but we still had to figure out how to be married in a way that worked for both of us. And somewhere out there, Eric was probably trying to figure out what had just happened to his second chance with the woman who got away. I hoped he'd respect Elise's decision and give us the space we needed to rebuild our marriage. But I had a feeling this wasn't over yet. Some stories don't end with a single conversation or a single choice. Some stories take time to unfold, and this felt like one of those stories. But for now, my wife was in my arms, and we were both committed to figuring out how to make our marriage work. That was enough to help me sleep. For now. The real test would come tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days that followed. The test of whether we could really change, really grow, really become the people we needed to be for each other. I was ready for that test. The question was whether Eric would let us take it in peace. But that night, holding my wife and listening to her breathe, I chose to believe that everything was going to be okay. That love really could conquer all, even when it got complicated and messy and required more courage than either of us thought we had. Sometimes, choosing to believe in love is the most adventurous thing you can do. And for the first time in months, I felt like Elise and I were ready for that adventure together.